Welcome back to Big Book Basic Training. Today we're going to break down Chapter 3, more about alcoholism. The purpose of this chapter is to assist people suspecting they may have alcoholism in effectively diagnosing themselves as either alcoholic or non-alcoholic. By the end of this chapter, the reader should know what differentiates the alcoholic from the non-alcoholic. Given such clarity and the criteria for making this decision, should they choose, they can then decide for themselves whether they have alcoholism or not. In this chapter, we will consider 3 proposed experiments or tests. The first controlled experiment or self-administered test is introduced very early in the chapter. It is most likely the least recommended of the 3 proposed methods because it does include drinking. We will consider a second experiment which proposes the person stop drinking for a full year. Once again, this experiment is not highly recommended because in this experiment it takes a full year to get the results. Finally, in the third test, several illustrations and examples are given that describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. Here we will spend some time pinpointing exactly what happens in the mind of an alcoholic at that very moment they decide, after a period of sobriety, to start drinking again. It is by taking the time to thoroughly analyze this moment in time when our mind changes, we see the pure manifestation of alcoholism's insanity. Also, we will look at some of the important facts those who realize they have alcoholism should be aware of. 1. Once a person has alcoholism, they will always have alcoholism. 2. Stopping drinking for a long period of time will not cure a person of their alcoholism. 3. Over time, the disease always gets worse, it never gets better. In other words, the alcoholic's physical craving for liquor always gets stronger over time, and their obsession for alcohol always gets stronger over time. 4. Science has no cure for alcoholism. 5. Simply understanding what alcoholism is and knowing that they have it is not enough to keep an alcoholic sober. 6. At certain times, unrecovered alcoholics have no effective mental defense against the first drink. With all that said, let's start reading more about alcoholism. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. Notice they said, the idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Looking back, I noticed that at times when I was trying to control my drinking, I was not enjoying my drinking. Conversely, when I was enjoying my drinking, I was not controlling it. That is why they mention the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is to, at the same time, control and enjoy his drinking. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. The delusion that I may be like other people has to be smashed. This means that the work I do regarding my understanding of alcoholism must eventually make a deep and lasting impression on my thought system as it pertains to drinking. My study of alcoholism must make an impression so deep I no longer entertain the idea I can do what other people do when it comes to consuming alcohol. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. My awareness of my declining control over my drinking led me in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. In the dictionary, pitiful means 1. Inspiring or deserving pity. 2. Arousing contemptuous pity as through ineptitude or inadequacy. Demoralized means 1. A person lacking spirit, courage, and discipline. 2. A person thrown into disorder or confusion, bewildered. 3. A person with corrupted morals. Incomprehensible means 1. Difficult or impossible to understand or comprehend, unintelligible. 2. Impossible to know or fathom. So, my growing awareness of my waning control over my drinking led me in time to a state of unfathomable confusion and bewilderment. Clearly, I was lacking spirit, courage, and discipline. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. We are like men who have lost their legs, they never grow new ones. Neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We have tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances there has been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe that they are in this class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. If anyone who is showing inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. Here are some of the methods we have tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with and without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum. Ad infinitum means again and again, in the same way, forever. We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not take long for you to decide if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of the jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. For this experiment, I devised a simple test. Every Friday night for 1 month, go have dinner at your favorite restaurant or bar. When you are done eating, walk up to the bar with $100 and lay it on the bar. Order your favorite drink, drink it. Order another of your favorite drinks, drink that one too. Then stop drinking for the rest of the night and do not drink again for the rest of the week until the next Friday when you repeat the experiment again, exactly how I described it, having only those 2 drinks per week on Friday night. Do that every Friday night for a month or 4 weeks, only having those 2 drinks per week. If you can do that successfully without drinking anything else in between, you are not an alcoholic. Also, you cannot use any mind-altering drugs during this 1 month period either. So I will read this one paragraph from the book again. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not take long for you to decide if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of the jitters if you get full knowledge of your condition. Keep in mind, when you are working with someone who is not sure whether or not they are an alcoholic, while reading this paragraph with them, you can propose this controlled experiment with the intention of his gaining from the experiment the full knowledge of his condition. If he gets drunk during the experiment and goes on a drinking spree and needs to detox after, he will at least go knowing with 100% certainty he cannot control his drinking and is therefore, in fact, an alcoholic. Provided, of course, he is honest with himself about it. On the other hand, if he only drinks those 8 drinks during that month, he can rest assured he is not an alcoholic. So if he sticks to the experiment and is honest with himself about the results, he will learn a very valuable lesson either way. Now, keep in mind there are still 2 more highly recommended diagnostic tests coming up later in this chapter that do not involve drinking. These other 2 tests will most likely be the favorable way to proceed. Though there is no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We have heard of a few instances where people who showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of some overpowering desire to do so. Here is one. Keep in mind, this is a true story. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts, and he quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started to drink, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to the belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months he was in the hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could therefore drink normally. But here is a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop, as he did, on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired, will find he can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as hopeless as those who had been drinking 20 years. To be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink for a long time, nor take the quantities some of us have. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers, who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics, are astonished at their inability to stop. We who are familiar with these symptoms see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try to get them to see it. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. If he is a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remained sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt that we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then should we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends have reasoned with him after a spree, which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy, are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable world award record. He was a good salesman. Everybody liked him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. Notice they told Jim what they knew of alcoholism and the answer they had found. And Jim made a beginning, meaning he probably started working the steps. His family was reassembled and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. Notice how after each time Jim got drunk, they worked with him. More specifically, they reviewed carefully what had happened to Jim each time he changed his mind and started drinking after staying sober for a while. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. As we read this short story, notice what it is they focus in on. They zero in on the moment Jim decided to start drinking again. The moment Jim decided to start drinking appears in the second paragraph in italics text. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into the milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of the intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he only mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this is an extreme case. To us it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that, parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. The next day we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. When I work with guys taking them through the book, I always stop here and cite similar examples of my own past. Examples of when I stopped drinking and everything was going fine. Then, the I'm going to start drinking again idea floated into my mind and pushed the I do not drink idea out. When this happens, all the reasons I quit drinking fail to come into my mind to help my mind resist the "I'm going to start drinking again" idea. This deadly "I am going to start drinking again" idea is an obsession that comes and goes only to return again. I have come to know that without recovery, it will return again and take possession of my mind. The certain reality of this elusive but inevitable obsession in my mind is what makes me an alcoholic. Normal, non-alcoholic people do not have this obsession living either dormant somewhere in their mind or actively running their mind. In this sense, an alcoholic's mind is like a computer possessing a self-destructive virus that cannot possibly be removed. In the short term, the best one can do is contain the virus and make sure it does not get triggered. In the long term, we can reorganize the computer's operating system so that it makes the computer process in a way that assures the virus not get triggered. Call it recovery. The dictionary definition for the word obsession is 1. The state of being obsessed with someone or something. 2. An idea or thought that continually preoccupies or intrudes on a person's mind. So, the thought or idea that I can stop drinking any time I want to and stay stopped needs to be put to the test and challenged if I am to effectively diagnose myself as either alcoholic or non-alcoholic. The best way to test my ability to stop and stay stopped is to look back over my drinking career and constructively and honestly review how I fared in the past during those times I decided to stop drinking. Turn to the page in your workbook that has the "My Attempts to Stop Drinking for Good" exercise. Starting in the far left column, list 3 of the times you stopped drinking and then started drinking again. Write the approximate year on the far left, write why you stopped drinking in the center column, and where you were when you decided to take a drink in the far right column. Let me show you using 3 of my own examples. The first time I remember trying to stop drinking was approximately 1990. I decided to quit drinking for good because I got a DWI. Approximately 1 month later, after having been without a drink for 1 month, I was hanging around my apartment on a Friday night. I had just finished cleaning the apartment. I went to the refrigerator to get something to drink, and I noticed my roommate's 6-pack of beer sitting on the top shelf of the refrigerator. I reached in and pulled out one of the beers, and I remember standing there in the kitchen staring at it in my hand. I stood there looking at it long enough to recognize beads of sweat starting to run down the sides of the beer. Then the thought crossed my mind, I don't want to drink this beer, as I removed the top from the beer. My next thought was, this is what I do, as I lifted the beer and started drinking it. Notice I was standing in my kitchen when the thought, this is what I do, crossed my mind. At that very moment, I changed my mind and I decided to start drinking again. I remember clearly that I had no strong desire to start drinking that beer. It seems I drank it out of sheer habit. Shortly after the first beer, I had another and then another. At some point during that evening, the obsession to start drinking again gripped my mind, and I turned back into a drinking being again. Drinking most nights and every weekend, just as before. The second time I remember trying to stop drinking was approximately 1990 again. I decided to quit drinking again for good because of the same DWI. Once again, approximately 1 month later, I was in a restaurant bar with a friend of mine and a couple lady friends. I went to the bar to order 3 drinks for them, and after ordering the 3 drinks, the thought came to mind, why not have a drink with them? It's Friday night and we're out with our lady friends, so heck, why not? So I said to the bartender, make it 4. At some point during that evening, the obsession to start drinking again gripped my mind, and I turned back into a drinking being again, drinking most nights and every weekend, just as before. The third time I quit drinking for good and started drinking again was after I got out of jail for 30 days. I got a 30-day sentence for driving without a license after they pulled my license for that same DWI. While in jail, I decided, when I get out of here, I'm going to move to Anaheim, California and stop drinking. And this time, I'm going to go to AA meetings. So I moved to Anaheim, stopped drinking the first day there, attended meetings for 6 months, and while driving to a meeting to get my 6-month chip, The sight of a Budweiser neon sign posted in the window of a stripper bar caught my eye while driving to the meeting. Right after I noticed the neon sign, the thought came to mind that I should go to that bar after I get my 6-month chip and have a couple beers. The next thought was, yeah, you're not an alcoholic. If you were an alcoholic, you wouldn't have been able to stop drinking for 6 months. My next thought was, yes, after this meeting I'm going to that bar and I'm going to have a couple beers. My mind was made up. That time, the obsession gripped me completely before I even started drinking. I finished the drive to the meeting and attended the meeting with my mind made up that I was going to the bar after the meeting and I was going to have a couple beers. The thought of not going to that bar and drinking never came into my mind to challenge the I'm going to that bar to have a couple beers idea. My mind was completely made up while sitting in the car driving to the meeting. I became a drinking being again while sitting in the car driving to the meeting. The obsession to drink returned to consume my mind in full force. In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you could label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time he has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work, his wife gets a divorce, and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit, if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good, he has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is an alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more from Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it was only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during that particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well, I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple cocktails with dinner. That was all. Nothing more. I ordered a cocktail in my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said or did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time, I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they had prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more, for what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then. It was a crushing blow. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and, I hope, more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you are 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. Had you offered yourself as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power.